I've been playing Pokemon since the beginning, with red and blue versions. I'm not saying that as a point of pride. I'm not any better than someone who first started on the Switch with Sword or Arceus or Violet. But because I've been playing this series for so long, certain elements get stale from time to time. That's why, especially over the last few versions, the Pokemon games have gotten a lot of gimmicks. Mega evolutions in X and Y, Dynamaxing and Sword and Shield, there are lots of examples. But for my money, the best gimmick that Pokemon has ever produced is regional forms. Here's why. Before I can tell you why I like regional forms so much, I need to explain what they are. To do that, we have to rewind to Pokemon Sun and Moon. The Gen 7 games, along with their Ultra versions, were the last ones on 3DS, and the first ones to introduce the concept of regional forms. Nearly 20 different Pokemon from Gen 1, the first one that many of us played, were reimagined for the Alola region. Their looks, abilities, and even types totally changed with the tropical setting. It would be like, I don't know, if a completely different version of me suddenly showed up in one of these videos.
Oi, eu sou Tony da Paldeia. São quase a mesma pessoa, mas eu falo uma língua mais bonita.
Yeah, kinda like that. Sun and Moon introduced the idea, and each new Pokemon game since then has taken the concept a step further. Looks that had gone stale felt fresh, and evolutions started varying. Then we even started to get ancient forms and convergent species. When you trace the development of regional forms, you can see how this initial gimmick grew, blossoming into more and more creative ideas that built upon each other. So now that you know what regional forms are, let's talk about why they're so great.
Vamos lá.
Like I said before, it all started with Pokemon Sun and Moon. Those games launched as part of the series' 20th anniversary, and by that point, some of the original 151 felt less exciting. We'd seen Diglett 1,000 times, but never with a little cowlick of hair, or a full-on He-Man hairdo when it evolved into Dugtrio. Executor was always a coconut tree, but in Alola, it became a real long boy that more closely resembled the tall palm trees of tropical islands. Plus, it got upgraded to a dragon type. That's another big factor here. Type changes. Regional forms don't just look different on the outside, they also have different stats on the inside. The best example of this, and my personal favorite regional form, is Alolan Vulpix. The original fox Pokemon of Kanto is seemingly based on a kitsune, a mythical messenger that travelers encounter deep in the woods. That's why its initial evolution is a fiery nine-tailed fox, literally called Ninetales. It's the oldest, wisest, and most powerful form of the kitsune. Naruto fans know what's up.
Acredita.
But Alolan Vulpix is totally different. It's an ice type that looks more like an Arctic fox. Alolan Ninetales carries on the snowy aesthetic and also adds a fairy type. So instead of being the legendary nine-tailed kitsune, it's closer to a fairy tale ice queen. These Pokemon in particular showed just how different regional forms could be. Their looks and inspirations changed, and with that came new types and origins. The sky's the limit with regional forms, even in the game that introduced the gimmick. I'm sure Executor knows a thing or two about the sky. How's the weather up there, bud? Then came Pokemon Sword and Shield, which evolved the idea, literally. We saw how regional forms could look different even before they grew up, but certain Pokemon in the Galar region could evolve into completely new species. Galarian Farfetch'd is a great example of this. It already looks different from its Cantonian cousin. That's to be expected. But to take things a step further, Galarian Farfetch'd can evolve, turning its leek into a Sword and Shield and becoming Sirfetch'd. This was the next natural step for regional forms, unique evolutions for new variants. Sirfetch'd is the quintessential example, literally carrying a Sword and Shield in Pokemon Sword and Shield. The knightly look also matched up with the Galar region's inspirations from Great Britain.
Inglaterra. O país de chá e biscoitos.
In fact, many of the regional variants reflect Galar's English roots. Remember, the original idea with Alolan forms was to show off the tropical style of Sun and Moon. With Sword and Shield, we got some historic and dapper and glamorous examples. Runerigus evolves from Galarian Yamask, and as you can tell by its name, it's based on rune carvings. Specifically, it seems to be the embodiment of runes carved by Vikings who visited the region. Moving forward in time, Mr. Rhyme is dressed like an English gentleman, evolving from a newly ice-typed Mr. Mime into something that looks straight out of the Victorian era. And if we fast forward to the time of glam rock, we get Obstagoon. Its rockstar look is a lot like T-Rex or David Bowie.
Ground control to Major Tom.
When Pokemon Legends Arceus rolled around, it had big shoes to fill. Not only were players expecting regional forms, but they were also due for some new evolutions. Fortunately, the developers didn't back down. In fact, they took a big swing by offering the first regional forms of starters.
Isso parece perigoso.
I know, right? Picking your starter Pokemon is a time-honored tradition, but Arceus asked players to choose from 3 that they'd already seen before: Gen 2's Cyndaquil, Gen 7's Rowlet, and Gen 5's Oshawott. Now here's where things get really interesting. Each of these 3 got brand new looks for their final evolutions, but I'd actually call them old looks. I don't mean old as in reused or unoriginal. Quite the opposite. These are like ancient regional forms that fit in perfectly with the Hisui setting. It's the first game in the Pokemon timeline, and with that comes a more historical tone. We can see that carried out in these final evolutions. Hisuian Typhlosion is dressed like a Psychopomp, the person who guides souls into the afterlife in many religions. Samurott is once again a samurai otter, but this time it's dressed much more like a Ronin from Japan's feudal era. Lastly, Decidueye's costume is even closer to the samurai archery art known as Kyudo. I wouldn't mess with anyone who can perfectly aim from underneath that hat. For all the historic flavor that these regional forms have, I also see a good bit of primitive or primal design. Take Voltorb and Electrode, for example. We're used to seeing them as self-destructing balls of electricity. In Hisui, however, they're almost like little wood carvings, adding a grass type to their stat block. This makes sense as a precursor to their more technologically advanced descendants. Then there's Overquill, who only evolves from Hisuian Quillfish. This older region is a bit more rough and tumble, and Overquill really does look like a sea urchin who's had to fight for survival more than a few times.
Perigoso também. Te magoias demais.
And now we come to Scarlet and Violet, the 9th generation of Pokemon. We've had 3 previous games with regional forms that keep getting better and better, so raising the bar once again is no easy task. But I'm happy to say they've done it. Let's go over what we have so far. Regional variants are a refresh of an existing Pokemon, often with unique evolutions and designs that reflect not just the new setting, but also its place in the timeline. Scarlet and Violet do all that and more. First, there's Paldean Wooper. The original Pokemon is a cute little axolotl. In Paldea, it seems to be inspired by the ribbed newt, a brown poisonous salamander found in the Iberian Peninsula, the real-world region that inspired this generation. With that comes a new poison and ground typing, plus a unique evolution called Clodsire, which is a heftier, muddier version of the poisonous newt. We've already checked 2 boxes, but what about the concept of Pokemon from different times? This is a spoiler-free video, but even if you've only seen the trailers, you know that Scarlet and Violet introduced the concept of Paradox Pokemon. Scarlet gets the ancient forms, and Violet gets the future forms. Roaring Moon, for example, is a much earlier version of Salamence, with large feathers that have yet to evolve into dragon wings. The legendary Pokemon on the covers embody this idea too. Miraidon is the future evolution of Cyclizar, with robotic parts and straight-up jet engines on its hips. Arceus showed us what Pokemon looked like at earlier points in history, and Gen 9 gave us both historical and futuristic versions to play around with.
Biologia é maravilhosa, eh?
Not only does this generation keep up with what regional forms did before, but it also puts a twist on the formula. We've come to expect these new spins on existing Pokemon by now, so Scarlet and Violet subvert expectations by offering convergent species. The first time you saw Wiglet, you probably thought it was a regional form of Diglett. I did too, but it's not. This garden eel that totally looks like a sock puppet is its own species. Even though it evolves into something a lot like Dugtrio, they're not related, at least not at this point in time. A convergent species is one with a common ancestor that adapts differently depending on where it lives. Both this convergent species idea and regional forms make perfect sense for Pokemon, especially since each game takes us to a different part of the world. If Vulpix and Alolan Vulpix are like cousins, then Diglett and Wiglet are more like super distant cousins with a common relative from many generations ago. Let's call it Biglet. We've gone through 4 different Pokemon games, and I hope by now you see why I love the idea of regional forms so much. Many gimmicks have come and gone. I don't think we'll see Terra Pokemon in the next one myself, but regional forms have stuck around, and they were always bound to. From the moment they were introduced, they were a refreshing take on many of the classic 151 Pokemon. In the following game, the concept literally evolved by offering new transformations that you could only get in specific regions. With Pokemon Legends, we got to see what these new forms would look like at a different point in history. And with Gen 9, we got all of those things, plus forward-thinking futuristic Pokemon and convergent species that managed to break the formula, yet expand on it at the same time. It's for reasons like this that I continue to play Pokemon to this day. I've grown up and changed a lot, and so has the series. Regional forms are proof of that. And Violet version basically told me that I'm never too old to play, so I'm gonna keep doing that. I'm pretty sure that every regional form of me feels the same way.
Temos que pegar Pokemon. Okay, back to English. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what Framework is doing, definitely hit that subscribe button in the middle. It would help me out an awful lot if you do. And if you want to see what we've already cooked up, you can hit that link on the far left. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.